Dear SVEPM delegates, we are coming to the last session, which is the Gareth Davies Lecture. So this Gareth Davies was one of the founding members of the society, and he became the first president 43 years ago, in 1982. He was the head of the Central Veterinary Laboratories Epidemiology Unit at Weybridge in England, and he laid the foundations of the vibrant society that we have today, and that we saw yesterday evening. The final plenary lecture is therefore named in recognition of all that Gareth has done for SVEPM. This year, the Gareth Davies Lecture will be given by Professor Katharina Stärk, who graduated as a veterinarian from Zurich Veterinary School and obtained her PhD from Massey University in New Zealand. Over the last 25 years, she conducted applied research on infectious diseases, as well as risk analysis, surveillance, and animal health decision-making in relation to animal-derived food. She worked in diverse environments, including the private industry in Denmark and academia in Switzerland and the United Kingdom. In 2019, Katharina Stärk joined the Federal Food Safety and Veterinary Office in Switzerland as head of the Department of Animal Health, and since 2023, she is also the head of the Science Department. Her professional passion lies in translating science into practice with the aim to assure health for all. And this is exactly what her Gareth Davies Lecture will be about. Katharina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. Thank you for being here. Thanks for your interest. Thanks also for the opportunity to choose my own topic. So this is the treat, I suppose, when you give this lecture, you can choose a topic yourself. And I chose it last autumn. And I choose it because the science policy interface is where I have worked a lot, and I find it very rewarding because of the impact that we have as scientists when it actually leads to policy making. I also choose the policy making in the context of crisis, because I think this sort of accentuates a lot of the aspects, and the challenges are heightened. So it's even sort of I don't know, it's the top league, I suppose, of this interplay between science and policy. My objective really is to make this lecture relevant to you all. So I'm interested, who of you advises directly to policy in their role? Yeah, quite a few. Let's say a quarter. Who of you thinks you advise to policy indirectly? Okay. I think some of you have not raised your hand. I think all of you, I think in this society, how I perceive it, and also the lectures and the presentations I've seen, I think they all have policy relevance. So I think probably all of you are somehow involved in this activity. So I want to start out with discussing what I mean when I talk about crisis, and we can have crisis at different level. I think I hope none of you have a personal crisis, because then you probably wouldn't be here. And I think we're all witnessing global crises, such as climate change, so I'm going to exclude those sort of extremes. And I focus on national crisis, because also this is the context within which I work at the moment, so I have most experience in that. And I found some description or definition of what we mean when we talk about national crisis. So this is a threat then can have significant impact on stability, security, and well-being of the citizens. So this is very much focused on the impact of an event. I added in the graph also the aspects of urgency and the complexity, because I think also these These two elements are significant when we think about crisis. And because it is important, because of the impact, it's important to be prepared for crisis. We also often talk about preparedness. So this is before the crisis. So we do whatever we can to be ready. For example, by implementing emergency response plans and doing emergency exercises and all of these things in the interest of time, that we would then be faster in implementing our emergency response. Well, unfortunately, we always have a lot of examples at the time of presentation, and so I selected this at the beginning of this year. Now, this has taken on different dimensions yet again in the meantime, but I think it's a good example of foot-and-mouth disease response, because it has this element of urgency because of the rapid transmission. It has complexity, different transmission pathways, also different impacts that you can have, and the impact is, in terms of economics, is significant. So this is a typical veterinary take on crisis. So how can science help in this? What actually do we mean when we talk about science? And again, I did some research, and so this is sort of the synthesis, let's say, of what you find. So the scientific approach is can be described by systematic and evidence-based approach. And the term evidence-based and science-based, I think I would use them interchangeably. It's very similar. But it's an approach that is characterized by a set of methods, a way of doing it that's supposed to give you rigorous evidence. So this should be robust. It's also quality assured by peer review. In society such as this, you present and then you're being challenged in a friendly way, but you are challenged. Or by your reviewers when you submit them, hopefully a much better way than we heard this morning. So this is the quality assurance that's built into the system, and it's sort of a continuous, so it never stops. So we continue to learn, and we we aspire to become better. Now this output of this process, this evidence, or the science, if you like, if it's used as a basis for decision making in policy, that's when we come to this policy-science interface. And I think a lot of the science that's been presented, and if you look at your last slides, okay, so this will contribute to better management and so on. That's where you will find that most of your work is involved in this interface. So what is policy then? Policy is an agreed way of doing things. And this can, again, happen at different levels. And it can be very regulated behavior, or it can be very light touch. You may have at home, in your family, you may have a policy of recycling. So you have agreed that this is how you deal or you contribute. You can have a personal policy, or your employer may have a travel policy. You may have not been able to take a flight to come to Berlin, but you may have to take the train, because this is a policy. So it can be at very different levels, in groups, employees, citizens, businesses. And it can be, typically when it comes to policy, it needs to be quite formal, because you need to then really follow this policy. You cannot just change it, and that often involves legislation. And then that also gives a framework within which you really have to operate. So you have to follow this policy. You cannot just do something else. And this is what some people find then very frustrating, when the policymaker says, well, I can see your point, but really I cannot accommodate this now in my in the power where I can act. So policies are developed using a cycle, and you find many graphs like this one if you search for the policy cycle. It typically starts with topic coming up on the agenda. So agenda setting, and then there is a number of options how you could deal with this, how you could reach an agreement how to deal with this. A decision is then taken, the policy is implemented, and then you have monitoring and evaluation, and this is actually a very important element to check on the validity and the effectiveness of the policy you have implemented, and then you go around and you start a new cycle to adjust and improve. Now, science can get involved or should be involved in the policy formulation, and then will support the decision making. So this is where maybe different policy options come in the policy formulation. Now, this looks very orderly, right? But of course, this can be disrupted at any time. So something can come in immediately and you will have to adjust. So this is in theory, but in practice it may look quite different. Also, these policy setting cycles, they may be going on all over the place. In an administration, you will have the environment policies, you will have the dietary policies, you have the economic policies, all going in their cycles. But in the end, some of these policies may end up contradicting each other, and so this should be avoided. So it's quite a complex system, and you may also have to negotiate then which way is going, or which aspect is going to have to be prioritized. So decision making, I'm going to follow up on this now. So decision making approaches, yes, of course, the science-based approach, that is our preference, right? So we should use decision makers should use the evidence that is available. Why? Because it should indicate what will work. So you have a good basis that you can actually achieve your objectives. Also, it's of course structured, is rigorous, transparent, robust, because it's also quality assured, so it's peer reviewed. And it also should indicate you where you have maybe some knowledge gaps. Now, there's a disadvantage, this needs time. And also it may not provide clear answers. And this is a problem when you are in a crisis. Yes, you need high quality decisions, so that means they should be factually correct. They should be robust, so also not like too specific. They should be applicable to maybe a range of scenarios. And one element that's not included here, but that's also very important, good decisions are politically useful and utilizable. So also in Parliament, they should find a majority, and this is perhaps something that is playing into this as well. Now, in a crisis, you may not have the time to go through this rigorous approach. So do we have any alternatives? Well, okay, so you could go with if you're a decision maker, you can go with your gut feeling. Some decision makers are really good at this, and so they very quickly get a feeling what might work. You can have also decision makers that have a lot of experience, so they remember what used to work before, or they have studied history and they know what worked in the past. But you may also have decision makers that will just have an opinion. And that of course is going to be very fast, maybe come up with like very creative solutions, which is not necessarily bad, and also it deals with the uncertainty because of course they are convinced that their decision is a valid one. But decision making in a crisis really is a challenge, and this is known. And I'm going to introduce the VUCA concept, and I'm not sure, has anyone of you come across this before? Is this very well known? Oh, okay, not really. So this is very generic, okay? So this is for any crisis. Has nothing to do with veterinary, but it has to do with decision-making in crisis and when you have to lead through a crisis. This may help you because it sort of boils down the different dimension where your challenge is and when you have to make decisions in a crisis. And the abbreviation is VUCA, stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So you have a rapidly changing situation, so it's volatile. You are, of course, uncertain because nobody can predict the future, or at least I can't. Maybe some of you can. We have complexity because we have multiple factors that interact also in nonlinear ways, and we have ambiguity, so it could be evolve in this way or maybe in another. And if you read sort of the bullet points, I think science or evidence can support this. We have methods. We can help in forecasting. We can do simulations. We can prepare scenarios, maybe even in advance, so we can support decision makers in this challenge. So I think evidence is. If you have capacity in evidence, that will help you as a decision maker in a crisis. So this is one part. But the other part that also starts coming out here is that the communication aspect, the stakeholder involvement. And I think that's the second part of the challenge. And you may have in your head, if you try to think about successful leaders in crisis, they typically also very good communicators. People believe them. They can go out and interact and convince the public that what they are suggesting, and they also that they can be trusted. So what this shows is that we really need a dialogue between, and this is also communication, of course, between science and policy. So this dialogue is really important because the decision makers or the policy makers, if you like, they need to know about the science that's out there. They need to know about what could help them in their decision making. And I've listed or tried to list a few factors that I think can facilitate this dialogue. And of course, ideally, you have a decision maker that has a background in science. Now, that would be perfect, right? But it's very rare. I tried to check our members of parliament, how many have a background in science. Turns out there is no statistics for this, so I would have to go and ask them all. I know that many of them are like teachers and lawyers, but we don't really know how many have a background in science. So no, that's probably not going to be the case. But maybe they have scientific advisors that they trust, like reference labs in our situation. So they have an established relationship. They know that these labs know what they're doing. So they have a good. They can provide good advice to the decision makers. Sometimes you also have established fora, like expert groups that have a structured exchange, so not just in crisis, but before. From the science side, I think it helps if science can speak with one voice and not like one scientist says this and the other says something else. Also, if you can already integrate different disciplines, so this comes to the One Health approach, if science can speak with one voice also across disciplines. And I think also on the science side, it helps if we are aware of the context and of the concern. So when we are elaborating as for example, scenarios, to already be open to think about what could be a challenge here. And then, of course, for the dialogue, the communication skills. This is a very abbreviated and simplified list, right? If you're really interested in this, there's a lot of information out there, and I've just listed one reference. That is a huge resource if you're interested in this dialogue. I thought it would be maybe nice to come from this sort of conceptual level to something more like an example. And I picked an example of a crisis that we all still remember because we all lived through this. I lived through this SARS-CoV-2 crisis in Switzerland, so that's why I also used this as the framework. Of course, this is all sort of within the framework of the legislation, and it turns out, it's quite interesting that we have quite an important constitutional basis in our constitution, Article 185, that enables the Federal Council, so these Federal Councils, all our ministers, they have special powers, so they if they identify a situation of what it says, imminent threat and serious disruption to public or internal or external security, they can sort of bypass Parliament. They can directly issue orders. This is very powerful, and I learned that not many countries have that, if any. So this is applicable to all kinds of crises, right? And for health crisis is then translated into the law. So that's the Federal Epidemics Act that sort of defines the different crisis levels and how the Federal Council can declare this so-called extraordinary situation and can then go on and pass legislation directly. So this was called on in end of February in 2020, and of course we all know the results. So this is our parliament, so no more parliament, no more negotiations, no more debate. Everyone stayed at home, closed borders, so very huge impact of these decisions. And there's a maximum, there's a time limit, right? So this can only be done for 6 months. So this is sort of the democratic sort of break that's been put on this, and it ended already in May, so it only lasted for 2 months, where we had partial lifting of some of the orders, and then Parliament picked up. And interestingly, it also has to be ended by Parliament. So how did science become active during the SARS-CoV-2 crisis in Switzerland? So we had this so-called science task force. It was operational for 2 years, started very quickly in the beginning. It had a clear mandate. It had multidisciplinary composition. There's 25 people. So they were only do it sort of, there was no financial compensation. It was personal mandates. And there was also now a follow-up mandate to kind of transfer this capability into post-COVID place. So what they produced are so-called policy briefs. So they would receive questions, and they would address and discuss them, and then produce these policy briefs. These are all public, so you can go and have a look if you're interested. And they covered a lot of topics, and I've just selected a few here. The famous discussion around the use of face masks, that was perhaps not one of the highlights of COVID management in Switzerland. But anyway, you can go and have a look if you're interested. Now, okay, so this is Switzerland using this as science-based, to derive science-based measures. So what we have here is a hazard that occurs, not only in Europe, but actually it's a pandemic, so it's worldwide. It's the same hazard, should have the same epidemiological characteristics. We have the same region, so now here Europe. We have similar age structure, behavior, legal framework, etc. We have similar economies. But if you look on the right, so that's March 2021, so that's 1 year into the pandemic. And this is just showing lockdown policies, and you see it's very different. So how come like for us, from a science perspective, how come for the same hazard you reach so different management, so different policies? And I think part of the explanation is that values differ between countries, and this is a very important element when you reach the decision on which policy is actually acceptable also in the end, that you have to think about values, and values differ greatly between countries, even at short distance, even within a country, perhaps. Okay, so 1 year after the official end of the pandemic, so that was last year in July, I was attending a panel discussion where these people here on the picture discussed, they had been involved in the COVID response in one way or another. And this is just what I took out of their discussion, so this is my own personal summary of that discussion. So it was a lot about understanding your role as a scientific advisor. What does it mean? What is your role and what is the policy role? So it was very important to realize for them that their role is not to take the decision. Even though perhaps as an individual, based on their own personal beliefs, they had a very clear preference for a decision to not go there, just to accept this limitation. Also, they came to the conclusion that it would be really good to establish these mechanisms during peacetime, because to mount all of this process overnight is it's an institutional challenge. Also, personal relationships would be good to establish also before the crisis hits. And perhaps also more sort of a preparatory recommendation to better understand each other's work. So for policymakers to understand really more about how science works, and also, what's important to us, and how policy works. So for scientists to maybe to start some exchange programs or other mechanisms to learn in advance. And to be aware, be prepared in a way. So since COVID ended, a lot of things have happened, and there's also been some studies done, for example, on the acceptance of science in society, whether this was affected by the COVID crisis or not. And the positive news there is, and so this is a study that was conducted internationally across 68 countries, is very reassuring that science is recognized in societies as an important basis for decision making, and it's also a wanted basis. However, we see that the credibility of decision makers, or at least some, is being challenged, and I want to come back to this concept of the social license in a moment. But I think the most important element to learn from what is happening, or what has happened during COVID, during this crisis, is that trust in politics is not a given. Trust in decision makers is not a given. It is highly variable, and there is even there is a huge body of research. You could go more into this if you're interested. What can increase trust and what can decrease trust? And it seems that fear is sort of a strong driver of an increase in trust, whilst anger is a very negative driver of trust. So once you become angry, you're unlikely to trust your decision maker. So the polarization, of course, is also a challenge. So I want to, in my last part of my presentation, I want to go a little bit more into this aspect of trust. Trust in science specifically, so trust in evidence, if you like. So this can be shaped at different levels. So first of all, in science itself, These are some elements I picked up that have been shown to be influential and to be positive. So, first of all, the quality of the science you do. So is it rigorous? Is it relevant? And is it unbiased? And with unbiased, I also mean, is it free from your own interest as a scientist? Because we are all individuals as well, and we need to recognize our own bias. And so this is an important part. And then at the level of the individual citizen, of course, education is a good approach and is important to make citizens able to judge and to also understand evidence. And this is also good news because all of us are also citizens, and all the people we know are citizens, and so we can expose them to our own science, and we can enter into a dialogue with those that are receptive, and not all of them are. So, of course, political ideology and also sometimes religion can be a huge hurdle, and perhaps it's better to focus on those that are maybe more open. And then, of course, also society itself can shape how science is recognized. And this is, I think, what we are witnessing at the moment, that political regimes and authorities, they can really shape or try to shape the perception of science. So how to increase trust? And I've sort of split, this is quite a busy slide. I'm going to pick up a few things. So on the left you see actions or ideas for actions on sort of the science side, so risk assessors I put here, and on the right side is actions by decision makers. And yeah, we can cultivate trust. We can be accessible. You can have open door days in your labs. You can welcome visitors. You can increase your transparency also, and be aware of your own bias, what I've just said. On the right side, I want to really elaborate a little bit on this concept of the social license. I came across this quite recently, and I found it relevant here because it's the basis for this is that in a democracy, really the decision makers have the legitimacy or the credibility to act in the best interest of the citizens. But this is not a given. So that this can also be removed. So yes, as long as we think what they're doing is legitimate and credible, they have the license to act on our behalf. But they must also show that they are open to negotiate equitable benefits for everyone in the society. They must acknowledge and accept social responsibility, and they must demonstrate respect for the concerns of others. And this is maybe something that, or these concepts that we see now being put to the test, at least in some countries. And we will see, whether the social license will be removed at some point from decision makers that really do not justify for the social license to be trusted upon them. Yeah, maybe I go back just quickly. Participation, the last point. I think this is also an important point. Also, again, of course, in democratic societies, how do we actually get people involved? How do decision makers know what people want? And this is not only scientists, also scientists, but maybe also sort of regular citizens. And there are a number of examples, such as these citizen panels, that have been used in a number of countries, including the EU, where groups of citizens are involved in a process where they discuss and then formulate recommendations, a lot of recommendations, and I think it's up now to also to the politicians to do something with these recommendations if they want to remain credible. Also, this is another example. It's much more current. This is an initiative by the National Academies now in the US, an attempt in building trust in a response. So this is avian influenza response. It's interesting, of course. There's a lot of interesting aspects of this. This is it's a science initiative. Apparently, trust is no longer there. Yeah. This is going to be interesting. It's ongoing, and it's open to stakeholders of all levels. But it's really meant to be including basic sort of grassroots citizen opinion as well. And it's led by the National Academies. So it's also about trust in science can also be shaped by institutions. And I came across this, I think we have people from Canada in the room. This is, it's quite some time ago that I've written it down somewhere, 2012. There was this event where the evidence is in the coffin, right? So the scientific evidence is mourned on Parliament Hill, and this was triggered by some decisions by Parliament on environmental research and budget cuts. And so this was quite effective democratic activity that then led to the creation of the post of Chief Science Advisor in Canada. And this person, I would really like to meet her, Mona Niemer. She's been reappointed for her 4th term, so she seems to be doing an excellent job. And I think increasingly a very important job. So it's good to know that Canada has a chief science advisor that hopefully will help them in the coming months. So I'm coming to the end of my talk. So what does it all mean for us, all of us in the room as epidemiologists and scientists? I think most of all I would put at the top do high quality research. So produce science that is robust, science that is relevant, and science that is unbiased, so also unbiased by your own beliefs. Go out and communicate, interact with policymakers, but also interact with the public. Engage in debates, even if it's maybe difficult. Also engage in fact-checking. That's something I have not really had time to elaborate more. I think that's also very important way in dealing with the internet. Like there is so much out there that is just not true, and it's also, we should make it also our responsibility to point it out. But last but not least, also I think we should know our place. We should remain honest and humble and remain within our borders, because there is a logic of evidence that we understand very well, but apparently there's also a logic of politics that I personally don't understand, so I'd rather not. So it's good to sort of separate things. And I would like to end with this quote that sort of really at the end it's about finding the right balance. Finding the right balance between the democratic approach but also expertise. And none of them can do it all. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, but I'll also thank a few individuals, particularly Dirk, who have engaged in sort of preparatory debates, leading all up to this presentation. And I recommend Dirk has been co-authoring a very significant and relevant piece of advice, I suppose, and it's going to be published very soon. There's a lot of information out there if you're interested. There's also going to be a documentary coming out later this year, so there's also different formats if you're interested. And to end, I was thinking, yeah, well, first, in my first version, I had a really nice picture of sunset in the Alps, and well, I thought, well, maybe I should rather put something a bit more like this, because I think we all have the means. We live here in Europe, we have the means, but do we have the courage? That's for us all to answer. Thank you very much.